Hello there, everybody. Welcome to this German GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. This tutorial is going to look at a tricky aspect of German grammar, something that many students studying for GCSE and iGCSE do find difficult in German, which is the word order. We're going to go through all of the key rules one by one. I'll explain them in a bit of depth. And explain exactly how this affects you and what you need to know for the exams. Okay, so just to introduce myself quickly first, I'm Dhananjay Talwar. I studied modern languages, French and Italian specifically, at the University of Cambridge for my MA degree and graduated from there back in 2015. I've been an educator for most of the time since, and I've actually been a full-time tutor for more than 6 years now. It's been a great experience because I love motivating my students and helping them to get to their target grades. And I also love languages, so I love what I'm teaching. I've learned more than 20 languages to different levels, at least 9 of those to fluency, including German, of course, which I did initially for GCSE successfully too. And up till now, I've helped at least 500 students to achieve or exceed their target grade in language GCSE or iGCSE exams as a full-time tutor. It's been a great experience and one that I look forward to continuing. Okay, so these now are the German GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. You should recognize your exam board here. 99% of students will be doing one of these exam boards for German GCSE or iGCSE. Now, there are differences which can be quite important from exam board to exam board, but don't worry because this video is talking about German grammar. We're looking at grammar in this video and one particular aspect of German grammar, which is word order. So no matter what exam board you're studying, whether that's AQA, Pearson EdXL, or Cambridge iGCSE, for example, you should carry on watching this video because it will be important for you. Every German GCSE or iGCSE student needs to know about German word order and how that works. So carry on watching. But do make a note of which exam board you're studying, as it's useful to know anyways. Okay, so word order is actually, in my experience, learning German, it's something that many students do struggle with in German. And there are good reasons for that. German does have many more word order rules than in English. English and German are Germanic, they're both Germanic languages. So they're both not just from the same broad language family, but actually from the same narrow language family as well. And there are certain similarities there, definitely, between German and English, as well as other Germanic languages. But there are crucial differences as well. And these differences, including the word order, will be areas that tend to trip up many students when they're speaking or writing in German in their exams. So German word order varies depending on the type of clause as well, whether it's a main clause or a subordinate clause. We're going to look at this in more detail further on. But a main clause is essentially a clause, a phrase, or a sentence that makes sense by itself. That can stand on its own, and it can makes good sense as a complete sentence totally by itself. Whereas a subordinate clause is a part of a sentence, a clause which is a part of a sentence that does not make sense only by itself. A subordinate clause will need to have a main clause in order to make sense, in order for the sentence to make sense. For example, in English, I rushed to school. That would be a main clause because that could be a perfectly valid sentence on its own. I rushed to school. That makes sense, makes perfect sense in English by itself. So that's a main clause. Because I was running late, that would be a subordinate clause, because I was running late. Obviously, that does not make sense as a full sentence just by itself. You can't just say, because I was running late. That on its own doesn't make sense. It would need to be attached to a main clause for that kind of subordinate clause to actually mean something. There are quite a few specific word order rules in German. I will take you through each of these one by one. The most important, definitely, for GCSE and iGCSE And it's worth bearing in mind these are likely to be especially important for speaking and writing papers. Because that's when you have to produce the language actively yourself. Of course, they'll be helpful for comprehension too when you're reading or listening to German in the other papers, but especially when you've got to produce the language yourself. We're going to go through these rules one by one. It is quite a bit to take in, so you may need to watch parts of the video a few times, which is absolutely fine. And of course, the difficulty is not just remembering one or two of the rules, but you have to try and remember all of them, at least as much as you can, in order to boost your grades and get towards the top grades, if that's what your aim is. Okay, these are the word order rules that we're going to explore and look at in this video. So the verb second rule, then the time, manner, place rule, then the rule on verb kickers, as they're often called, and then modal verbs. We're going to look at each of these in turn, and then I'll give a quiz and opportunities to practice too. So let's start with the verb second position, or V2 rule, as it's sometimes called. So as I've just said, there's a clear distinction between main clauses, which are a clause, part of a sentence that can make sense completely by itself, and subordinate clauses, which are clauses that do not make sense just by themselves in a sentence. That is important for many of these rules, particularly for this one. Because for the verb second position rule, we are talking only about main clauses. We're just looking at main clauses here. And in a main clause in German, the conjugated verb, conjugated means not in a neutral form such as the infinitive, but actually conjugated in a specific tense in German, has to be the second element or idea. Notice as well that it says the second element or idea here. It doesn't say that the conjugated verb must be the second word in a German sentence. That will often be the case, but not necessarily. There are definitely going to be times when you come across sentences in German where a conjugated verb is not actually the second word in the sentence or the main clause, and that does not mean that they have not followed this rule, because it doesn't say the conjugated verb has to be the second word in the sentence. It says that it must be the second element or the second idea in a main clause. Here are some examples of that. It sounds quite a simple rule. Of course, because it's so common, it's something you really must remember pretty often when producing German, and can be easily forgotten. So it will likely take practice. So simple sentences like Ich spiele Fußball, Fußball, I play football, or I'm playing football. You can see that the verb there, spiele, that's a conjugated verb, that goes as the second element and even the second word in that sentence. So ich, the subject pronoun meaning I, is the first word and the first element or idea, more importantly. And then the second one is the conjugated verb as promised according to this rule. Another example is the second one. Morgen gehe ich ins Kino. Tomorrow I'm going to the cinema. So here the order is slightly inverted. We've got, it's not ich, the subject pronoun, that comes first. It's morgen, meaning tomorrow, which you can definitely do in German, and this produces a completely correct sentence in German, which emphasizes the fact that this is going to happen tomorrow, even more so. So morgen can come first. In the second example, morgen is the first word, and more importantly, it is the first element or idea in the sentence, which is then followed by the conjugated verb gehe, I'm going, which is therefore the second element or the second idea in the sentence. And then the subject pronoun ich actually comes after that conjugated verb. So that can happen in standard German sentences in main clauses too, where the order is somewhat reversed. The subject pronoun, the word for I, you, he, she, it, they, and so on, comes just after the conjugated verb, and you've got a different word or different idea. Could be something to do with time, for example, but not necessarily. Plenty of other ideas are possible coming first. The third example illustrates more clearly that the conjugated verb has to be the second element in a main clause in German, always, but it does not necessarily need to be the second word. So the last example here is in der Schule habe ich viele Freunde. At school, I have many friends, with the emphasis really on the first part, at school here. So in der Schule, that consists of three different words, in der Schule, but it still counts as just one element or one idea in the main clause because all of those three words are tied together. They have one joint meaning, essentially. They can't be separated. So they are, meaning at, they go together to mean at school. So they count as the first element or idea in that main clause. And then those are followed, that first idea, which is in der Schule, is then followed by a conjugated verb again, habe. So this can be tricky for students to understand. They may look at this kind of sentence, the third example here. In der Schule habe ich viele Freunde. And they may think, hang on, something is wrong there. It hasn't followed this rule that we've just gone through because the conjugated verb is not actually the second word in the main clause. But even though it's not the second word in the main clause, the conjugated verb is still actually the second element or idea in that main clause in this third example. Because in der Schule all goes together as one element or one idea, effectively. It might well take practice to identify what counts as a joint element or idea. But in der Schule, clearly those three words are going together in that sentence. They're not expressing completely different ideas or meanings at all. Okay, that verb second rule is very important and really common in German too. The second rule here is time, manner, place. So this is likewise very important for GCSE, something that GCSE students typically take quite a lot of time to practice and go through for good reason. It's perhaps less salient or less common compared to the verb second rule. The verb second rule you'll come across very often. But this is still the standard order that German or native German speakers would use when giving information on when, how, and where something happens. So in German, when you do tell somebody when, how, and where something happens or will happen or happened and so on, you generally use this same order always, which is first detailing when, so saying when it happens or will happen or happened. Then how, so adding more details about what it is that happened or is happening or will happen. And then lastly, where, so where it happens or will happen or already happened. So it's always in that order: when, then how, then where. We'll see a few examples of this now, but whenever you're describing when, how, and where something happens, this is definitely the most natural sounding word order in German. Technically, it's not a mistake necessarily if you do change or mess around this order a little bit, but for GCSE, definitely, examiners can think of that as an unintentional mistake rather than something stylistic. And I would stick with this word order of time first, then manner, then place, or when first, and then how, and then where. When you're giving details of, say, an event or something that's going to happen or is happening or has happened. Here are some examples to illustrate. So, ich gehe am Wochenende mit meinen Freunden ins Kino, which means I'm going to the cinema with my friends on the weekend. So in English, the word order is quite flexible. You could say I'm going to the cinema with my friends on the weekend. You could say on the weekend, I'm going to the cinema with my friends. You could say I'm going with my friends to the cinema this weekend, for example. That word order can change, but in German, it is much more standard to follow this word order. First, you start with when the event is going to happen, which is what we've got first here, am Wochenende, on the weekend, which you'll note actually comes last here in the English. But nevertheless, this is still the much more natural word order for German. So you say when first, then comes how, which basically gives extra details about what is going to happen, which is mit meinen Freunden, with my friends, mit followed by the dative plural here, which can be tricky. And then lastly, you give details about where. Where is it going to happen? Which is ins Kino, uh, to the cinema. Yeah. So you can see that this sentence, ich gehe am Wochenende mit meinen Freunden ins Kino, does follow that time, manner, place rule. And it is important that you try and respect and stick to that rule, when you're talking about events, and detailing all of those. You might find sometimes you don't have how. There's bits like these details, like with my friends, extra details of what's happening will not be there, or you might not need to specify where you're going exactly. But I would still, even if you're just talking about when and how, I would still stick with this order: when first and then how, for example, or when first and then where. So even if you remove one of the elements, try and stick with this word order. This would make your sentences sound more natural in German. Some GCSE examiners could even simply think that this is more correct. And just to point out here that the verb second rule is still followed in this sentence, actually. That's the first rule that we mentioned on the previous slide, that the conjugated verb, has to be the second idea or element in a main clause. This is a main clause because it makes sense just by itself in German and in English. And gehe is the second word, and more importantly, the second element or idea here after the subject pronoun ich, meaning I. So both of those rules are obeyed in this sentence. Okay, now it possibly gets a bit more complicated. Each of these rules, like I said, are likely to take some time, practice as well to consolidate, because German grammar does have more rules and more to memorize than, say, English grammar, for example. So do take your time to make sure that everything here is clear, as clear as possible, and do practice it as well. Don't neglect that. So the verb kicker rule is something that students can find tough for GCSE and iGCSE German. It's often called the verb kicker rule. This is essentially a rule that generally affects subordinate clauses. So not main clauses, but subordinate clauses, which are kind of secondary clauses, which cannot exist or don't make sense just by themselves. They need to cling on to, or they need to be attached to a main clause for them to really exist or make any sense. And I call this the verb kicker rule, which is quite a less formal way of referring to it, but there may well be other rules out there, other names out there for the rule too. So essentially, after certain conjunctions, the ones listed here would be the most important for GCSE. And these conjunctions can be kind of more casually called verb kickers. The conjugated verb goes right to the end of the clause, not necessarily the whole sentence, but it will go to the end of the clause. Often that will mean the end of the entire sentence in German, but not always, not necessarily. There is a stereotype about how when you're reading German or listening to German, for instance, you often have to wait right until the end of the clause or the sentence to find out what is actually happening, because that's where the verb goes, right at the end of the sentence or at the end of the clause. That's often the case in German, and this is one of those instances where that happens, where the main verb, the conjugated verb, is pushed right to the end of the clause or the sentence. And that happens specifically after these conjunctions, which are called verb kickers precisely because they, of course, kick the verb to the end of that clause. So I'll give you a few examples here. And we can also first run over the most important verb kickers for GCSE and iGCSE German, which are weil, meaning because. That's probably arguably the single most important or useful verb kicker, the one that you'll come across or use the most. Das, this one is with two S's, meaning that. Wenn, which means when or if, also pretty common, as is das. Obwohl, meaning although, perhaps not as common as the first three, still very useful for GCSE. Als, which means when, but it's only used to mean when. It only means when, and only includes this verb kicker tendency when you're talking about the past. When I was little, for example. When I was 10 years old. In that case, you could use als. but not when talking about the present or future. Before, which shockingly means before, nachdem, which means after, damit, which means so that, and ob, meaning if or whether. The ones towards the end are a little less common. The ones right at the top, definitely, I would say, are the most crucial for GCSE and iGCSE. Many students will not necessarily master some of these rules for GCSE and iGCSE, but aiming for those top grades, these things can really help you to stand out and get more marks. And here's an example to show you what we mean by verb kicking the verb to the end of the clause if it comes after one of these conjunctions. This example is Ich bleibe zu Hause, weil ich krank bin, meaning I stay or I'm staying at home because I'm ill. So the main clause here is Ich bleibe zu Hause, I stay at home, which is a sentence that makes full sense just by itself. The subordinate clause here, containing the verb kicker, is weil ich krank bin, because I'm ill. That's a subordinate clause. It doesn't make sense just by itself. And the verb kicker here is clearly weil. So because that subordinate clause starts with weil, meaning because, we have changed the standard word order. So instead of weil ich bin krank or weil bin ich krank, for example, you would actually put the conjugated verb bin right to the end of that clause, weil ich krank bin. That can sound a bit unnatural at first when you're getting used to this rule and using it in practice. But with practice, with time, it starts to sound more and more natural or necessary in German. Definitely, these rules can be tough to memorize, but generally, it's largely practice and remembering to use them. Every time you write any of these conjunctions in German, you must remember that they push the conjugated verb, right to the end of the clause whenever you're writing or speaking in German. It's easier, of course, with reading and listening because those are more passive skills and you'd simply have to recognize the meaning and understand them rather than produce the right word order yourself. Okay, so do give this the due practice. To the point where ideally you should be able to remember every time you use one of these verb kicking conjunctions that verb, the conjugated verb, goes right to the end of the clause. Okay, one more rule then for us to go through regarding word order, which is the modal verbs rule. This is the last one, perhaps the least significant too. Modal verbs, this is actually fairly similar to the verb kicker rule as well. There are some similarities. So modal verbs are helper verbs, really, that are accompanied by another verb in the infinitive form. So these modal verbs, they never really exist in a German sentence just by themselves. They're always followed by another verb. And that second verb that comes after the modal verb would normally go in the infinitive form, the dictionary form, which translates in English as to, and then the meaning of the verb, like to go, to see, to have, to be, to do, and so on. The main modal verbs for GCSE and iGCSE are, these are definitely, if you're doing German for GCSE, these are definitely ones that you'll study in school or during the course. They include können, to be able to, or potentially you can use the word can in English, müssen, meaning to have to or must, dürfen, to be allowed to or may, wollen, to want to, sollen, to be supposed to, sometimes translated with should as well, and mögen or möchten, which means, would like to, essentially. GCSE students are more likely to use möchten than mögen. All of these count as modal verbs in German. So all of these will be accompanied by another verb, which would generally go in the infinitive form. And this rule is simply stating that that second verb that comes after the modal verb or helper verb goes right at the end of the sentence. So the modal verb occupies the position of the second element or the second idea of the sentence, as the conjugated verb in a main clause in German always has to do, as per the first rule that we went through today. The other verb, which is in its infinitive form, will go right to the end of that clause, which is often right to the end of that sentence too. Here's one example to make this clearer. Again, This is largely just about practice and getting used to it, that whenever you use any of these particular modal verbs in speaking or writing, you must remember that the second verb, which is in the infinitive, goes right at the end of the clause. So this example is Ich will heute Abend Fernsehen. Ich will, that's the modal verb, which is the conjugated verb, so it stays as the second element or idea of the sentence. As you can see, it is here. Will, it's actually the second word as well. The first element or the first idea is ich, meaning I. And then the second verb in the infinitive form, Fernsehen, goes right to the end of that clause, right to the end of the sentence, effectively here too, producing Ich will heute Abend Fernsehen. I want to watch TV this evening. Okay, like I said, these can be tricky. So yeah, do make sure to revise and practice these and look over any elements in this video again if they are more difficult. Okay, this is a mini test now on word order to see how much you understand. Okay, so you've got to translate these sentences from English to German, bearing in mind all of the word order rules that we've just gone through. The first sentence to translate is I learn German every day. So try and think through and remember all those rules that we looked at, the four of them. Think through which rules you may have to use here, and then have a go at translating the sentence. Okay, let me show you the answer. I think there are two alternatives actually for this. But yeah, in German, this would be either Ich lerne Deutsch jeden Tag or jeden Tag lerne ich Deutsch. The only word order rule here that's relevant is the verb second rule, which stated that the verb, the conjugated verb, must be the second element or idea in any in any main clause in a German sentence. So here it is, both in Ich lerne, lerne is the second element or idea there, ich would be the first one, and even in the second example here, jeden Tag lerne ich Deutsch, lerne, the conjugated verb, is still the second element or idea. Jeden Tag is the first element or idea, which translates as every day and counts as one unit or joint unit of meaning there. So that counts as just one idea, even though it consists of two words. Okay, potentially getting a bit harder now. So the English sentence to translate is I play football with my friends in the park after school. So try and think through which rule you might need to follow and then have a go at translating the sentence. I will give a bit of time to think. Okay, let me show the answer to this one then. So this would be most naturally in German, this would be Ich spiele nach der Schule mit meinen Freunden im Park Fußball. So again, we're following that time, manner, place rule. That is the most relevant rule for this. The verb is still second here. It's the second element in the clause, ich spiele. But we're focusing more on the time, manner, place rule here. So time, when the event is going to happen, or what happens, comes first, nach der Schule, after school. Then how, mit meinen Freunden, with my friends, which gives more detail about the activity. And then where, im Park, in the park. Yeah, and only then, right at the end, do we discover what the person is actually playing, Fußball or football. Yeah, so this can be tricky, but this is an example of a time, manner, place rule. Number 3 then, the English sentence to translate is I am sad because I'm tired. So I'll give you a bit of time to think through this. Again, you might well need to remind yourself or think about which verb rules, which word order rules are relevant here. And then have a go at putting it all into German. Okay, let me reveal the answer then. This in German would be Ich bin traurig, weil ich müde bin. Yeah, traurig means sad, tired is müde. But the key thing here is the verb kicker. Because translates as weil normally in German, and that is a verb kicking conjugation. So because we have the second clause starting with weil, that conjugated verb in that clause goes right to the end of the clause. So you wouldn't say weil ich bin müde or weil bin ich müde. It would have to be weil ich müde bin. Very easy to forget that and to overlook the fact that there's a verb kicking conjugation in there. So you really do have to be careful with your word order in German, and there's quite a lot to think through writing and translating into German too. Okay, now a brief quiz to test your understanding of these word order rules. Number one is, what is a modal verb? Okay, let me show the answer to this. So a modal verb is a verb which is accompanied by another verb. Normally that second verb is going to come in the infinitive form. Question 2 then, this is true or false. There must be a conjugated verb as exactly the second verb in any German sentence. So does there have to be a conjugated verb as the second verb in any German sentence? Let me show you the answer for this. This is false. Conjugated verb certainly doesn't necessarily need to be the second verb in any German sentence. Many sentences would only contain one verb. So that statement is certainly false. But even in terms of words rather than verbs, a conjugated verb doesn't necessarily have to be the second word in any German sentence or main clause in particular, but it does have to be the second element or idea in a main clause in German. And that's the case for any main clause in German. It's tricky, but try not to confuse the second word with the second element or idea in a main clause, because they're not the same thing. Okay, question 3 is true or false again. Any German sentence that doesn't follow this time, manner, place rule is actually incorrect. Grammatically incorrect in German. Okay, let me show the answer for this. This is actually false too. German sentences can vary away from the time, manner, place rule, although it does usually sound less natural and authentic. That is the standard German word order, so I would stick to that, particularly for GCSE and iGCSE. It's actually safer as well. But if you do diverge from the time, manner, place rule, it's not necessarily the case that that sentence will be grammatically incorrect in German automatically. And lastly, question 4, what's the difference between a main clause and a subordinate or dependent clause? Subordinate or dependent clauses are the same thing, but alternative names. Okay, I'll show this as well. So a main clause is one that makes sense fully by itself, but a subordinate clause or dependent clause does not. German, of course, has different word order rules for main clauses and subordinate clauses, so there's something you need to understand well. Okay, if you've got any questions at all on any of that, or if you'd like to inquire about more personalized help and classes, which I do as well, you can get in touch through email or via Facebook and Instagram. And I post almost every day on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn, sharing my love of languages with people, hopefully inspiring them to learn more languages and giving them the tools that enable them to do so while having a huge amount of fun as well. I do post a lot about exams on those platforms too, including GCSE and iGCSE exams. So do give me a follow on each of those. I have many resources, free resources too, available for German GCSE as well. So don't hesitate to reach out to access any of those. And I do one-to-one classes, group classes too, and courses and plenty more. So do get in touch if you'd like to know more on any of this.